oil refinery. It is difficult for him to do what he's doing if he's not on the correct side of politics. And therefore, he chose not to necessarily engage in the things that may be misconstrued as going against the very side that supports him. So business people need politics. In this country, you have seen companies, there could be foreign investors that have had to pay heftily to meet the political leadership before they can start business. But also politics needs the private sector. Politics goes to the private sector in the pursuit of political finance contributions. During election campaigns, I know that the private sector gets to be on the receiving end of men and women that want to be politically supported. Just the other time, we were having a chat with the some members of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, and we're being told that the private sector does not like elections, because when election time comes, they are inundated by these men and women that want them to make contributions. And there are those that come from certain political parties that think that by law, that private business has to make a contribution if it wants to survive. And therefore, they're telling us when we go through elections, our profitability goes down, and we have to spend the next 2 years trying to recover from the campaign contributions. But also, there are those businesses that are happy and willing to, to be on the front foot and make sure that the politics is on their right side, especially businesses that are not so straight, and they would want to have the political backing. Also, businesses, people that engage in things you could call criminal, would want to be seen to be, hobnobbing with the political leadership, so that the police and other law enforcement mechanisms can know that this man is not a joking subject. You don't go, you have to go slow on them. And so there is a symbiotic relationship between the private sector and political financing, which we want us to interrogate today. And we hope that this would also provide a basis for future studies aimed at establishing the correlation between the private sector and political financing. We know that the private sector views government as a source of big ticket deals, whether they be working in the construction sector, whether they be whether it be technology. If you're looking for big clients, you have to go to government. That is the big client that everybody targets. But in Africa, for you to be able to get your hands on those big ticket deals, you need some political backing. And that political backing doesn't just come easy. You have to be seen to be supporting the politics. So here we are, and I'm hoping that in the next 2.5-3 hours, we'll be able to share some insights that would provide a basis and chart a direction for how we are going to, for how politics and business can interact in pursuit of democracy and democratic ideals, such as transparency, such as accountability, so that issues such as integrity and electoral integrity, to be specific, can be achieved. So without much ado, allow me to stop here and welcome you. Thank you for joining us, and pray that you will, effectively participate, contribute, share your views, whether online or physically, so that we can chat a way forward for our country. God bless you. I salute you all.
Thank you so much, Henry, for the opening remarks and the welcome remarks. Like I said, I'll be introducing people as they come in. We have a representative from the ruling NRM party, National Resistance Movement Party, is in the house. You're most welcome. Yes, good to have you. It's really good to have you. If the media team is ready, it's important that we put this conversation in context, and you could probably play we call it the opener, before I then invite the keynote speaker to do justice and give us where to start from to have this conversation. Media team. Politics and the private sector have a symbiotic relationship. On one hand, the private sector needs politicians for business protection and creating the enabling environment needed for business to thrive. While, on the other hand, politicians need private business as a source of political campaign finance donations. Thus, business companies and corporations, local and international, target the politicians who work in government as a strategy to win big ticket deals, such as infrastructure construction and supply of military hardware or equipment. The fact that governments often spend over 60% of their total national budgets on public procurements attracts the interest of private business. Thus, businesses take keen interest in who gets to occupy political office. The practice is that when businessmen make political finance contributions, they expect contracts and other benefits in return. Sometimes criminals hide under the umbrella of private sector and make political contributions with the intention that if they are seen to have friends in high elective office, the police will be tempted to avoid investigating their activities too thoroughly. It's against this backdrop that ACFIM intends to organize the 5th Symposium interrogating private sector and political finance in Africa. Thank you so much. And that's the reason why we are here today and why we focus on the private sector and political financing in Africa. And your candid conversations will help us shape how these two should interact to improve both the private sector and how it interacts with our democracy. That said, allow me now to make a few house rules. The first house rule that we shall be guided by the Chatham rules. I think many of you know them. Secondly, from this point onwards, I encourage that we limit movements because we need to be kind to the live audience. So we have to limit our movements. And also for the participants who are joining us virtually, you are free to drop your questions or comments through the different forums, which I did read out earlier on YouTube, ACFIM-UG, Twitter, ACFIM-UG, and also Facebook, ACFIM-UG. We shall be able to pick your questions or comments from those different platforms and relay them to the different panelists. That said, allow me to make the introductions. I'll start with no specific order, but specifically I'll start with the keynote speaker. Introduce the keynote speaker. After the keynote speaker giving us the keynote address, I will take some 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes introducing the panelists as I will be inviting them to take their seats at the podium. And then the second phase of the conversations will start, where I will be moderating with the panelists looking at the different dimensions of this animal called private sector and political financing in Africa. I think we are ready. and I'm excited. Once again, you're most welcome. Now, allow me to introduce a person I've described as a gentleman with a coat of many colors for the various reasons. He's a scholar, he's a teacher, he's a researcher, and a politician. He's a scholar because he possesses a doctorate of law from the University of Western Cape, that is Cape Town in South Africa. He's also a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law, Cavendish University in Uganda. We are talking about none other than Dr. Walyemera, who is also a research fellow at the Faculty of Law, University of Western Cape, South Africa. He has also been a research fellow at the Institute of International and Comparative Law in Africa, and this is at doctorate level. Dr. Walyemera is also an advocate and a commissioner for oaths and notary public of the High Court of Uganda. He is one of the 2 Ugandans who are lawyers on the list of Council of the African Court on Human and People's Rights based in Arusha in Tanzania. Dr. Walyemera is a researcher, having published numerous journal articles on governance, including one which I found interesting on campaign financing at a time when that subject was still new in Uganda. He has had a stint in the political world, having served as a member and a leader of the Conservative Party. I hope you're still with the Conservative Party. You tell us. He was the founding chairperson of the Council of Secretaries General at the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, which many of you know as IPOD. He has also played key leadership roles in the Inter-Party Cooperation, IPC, including the National Consultative Forum for Political Parties. He has served on several election observation missions. That's why I said he's a man with a coat of many colors. Dr. Daniel Walyemera, you are welcome, and please come and give us your keynote address.
Okay, as he sorts this out, maybe let me just do the introductory remarks. Thank you very much for those kind words. Oh, okay. You can't hear me? Oh, sorry, the outside people. Okay. Thank you very much. You know, because I'm a teacher, I like you moving around. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for those kind remarks and introductions. I would like to thank Henry and the organization. I was telling him when we were seated there that this is a subject that many people, including professors of law, including people who do politics, including all manner of people who are into human rights, take lightly or take jokingly. Yet it's a very serious subject. Yet it's a very serious subject. And as we're going to see, it affects many areas of our lives. It can affect the economy. It can affect human rights. It can affect the decision-making of key institutions of government. It can affect social services. It's so wide-ranging that it's a surprise that people are not paying attention to this issue called campaign finance. I told Henry that when I was a student and I was defending my thesis, one of the very eminent professors in the country said, but is that a researchable topic? That's the question he asked when I was defending. So, but this is a very serious topic. And I want to thank Henry and the organization, because much of the work that you find on campaign finance in Uganda cites the work of this very organization. And I have not declined a single invitation to come to be part of this organization and its activities, whether paid or unpaid, and I'll continue to do so. Okay, so that's about it. So that's my outline that I'm going to go through. Since I just have 20 minutes, I'll try to be as fast as possible. And when I'm teaching, I'm told the attention, I've come across literature that says the attention span of people is about 40 minutes. So I'll try to be as fast. Since I just have 20, I hope I'll keep your attention to this. Okay, so you see at the introduction, I'm indicating that campaign finance is a public good, but I highlight the word regulated, and it's for a purpose. I'm indicating there that campaign finance enables the nurturing of democratic values in society, and I've given the examples there. It enables a functional political party system. If you have a country that does not have political parties, which political parties do not have nursery beds, I usually call them nursery beds, for nurturing leaders, then you're going to have challenges having quality leaders eventually at the top. So campaign finance can do that. It is also a tool that can be used to mainstream affirmative groups. If you go to countries like France, you find that a political party is given money on the basis of those mainstreaming activities. How many women have you presented as candidates carrying your party flag? How many youth have you presented? How many disabled have you presented? How many ethnic members of the ethnic groups have you presented? It's on that basis in France that you will receive either more or less money from the public purse to do your political activity. So it can also be used to mainstream these groups at decision-making levels. Then the other one is it protects political equality of opportunity. Obviously, when we're going to the polls, ideally we should be equal in order for us to have a proper competitive electoral process. If we're not equal, then they won't be. I mean, you've heard of the word, and many scholars have written on this, where they say that it was not an election, it was a selection. Because everybody knows that whereas the election is being held, it's a foregone conclusion on who is going to win. So regulated political financing then enables equality of opportunity and proper electoral competition. Then it also strengthens the autonomy of politicians, the independence of politicians. He has talked of the businessmen who are not independent because they have to give so much money, but politicians also need to be independent. Many of you, I don't know whether there's an MP here, but many of you know that there are places now that have just become like deal houses. They are not doing exactly what it is they're supposed to do. They're just transacting. If we make some noise, okay, how much do you have to give us so that we continue? So political financing in a political party would enable that politician to be independent of these interesting influences, to make decisions that are for the benefit of all of us as a community. So I indicated regulated. Here I'm saying the unregulated financing of political parties and campaigns can cause serious challenges to the economy. In my opening, my off-the-cuff remarks, I indicated many problems, but here I'm indicating it can cause policy capture. The debate that a country should be having can be captured by a few people. And consequently, they may derail the national agenda of a country. Why? Because they have the money and they are influencing civil society groups, they are influencing activist citizens to post on Facebook, social media, and so on. And I know some of you who may be working with intelligence services, you know you do this kind of thing very well. That we are still discussing the death of somebody, then you bring you bring a very interesting story. We're still discussing poison, then you bring something else. So in the similar sense, the way the intelligence services work, you can have a policy capture if you have unregulated financing. And that policy capture can be taken up by people who have the money and people who have a say or influence over politicians. And that obviously can include the private sector. It can cause inflation. Akim here has done a study, I think for the 2016 elections, Henry, where you indicated that there was 2011 elections. Immediately after the 2011 elections in Uganda, we had very serious issues with inflation, and it can be partly attributed to the amounts of money, unregulated amounts of money that entered into our Ugandan economy. It can cause corruption, especially political corruption. Henry has been talking about the examples here. And most importantly, the more recent word is state capture. So I'm giving South Africa there as an example. Many of you who are in the press are hearing about a commission of inquiry appointed to discuss this issue in South Africa. Just two Indian brothers went to the extent of even appointing ministers in the South African government because they had captured the government. They were appointing key executive directors of key government institutions. They were appointing ministers. All this has come out in that report by the current CJ of South Africa, who was then the deputy CJ who was appointed to chair this commission. Wow. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I've indicated that unregulated finance can cause all those problems. And because it can cause all those problems, if political parties simply just concentrated on raising money from the private sector because they need to feed, they need to pay off their way back into power, you're going to have challenges with the provision of social services. And Henry still gave an example here of people being asked to fund. You've heard of many groups here. I'm going to mention one group. You've heard of many groups of rich people who, in our business as the public, are busy going to all these offices where serious decisions are being taken and they are getting the mega deals. And when it comes to the public procurement rules, which are present, which should enable competition so that we get quality social services, those public procurement rules are put aside, and these people who have been dealing in the night are then given these deals, and then they give us poor quality roads, they give us poor quality dams, they give us, we had a problem with one of our dams. Those are some of the challenges that we would get. And we're going to shortly discuss what other regions have done. For example, Europe has established rules on how you do these kinds of things. Obviously, because of that, if you have an election happening just before the election, you're going to have, as he has said, you're going to have businessmen saying their profits will be low. But then their profits will be low before the elections. After the elections, if they have paid the proper people, they are going to make a killing. So it's both ways. They are making a loss here, but after the elections, they are going to get money. Yes, to them it works. I don't know why they didn't tell you that they also, after the elections, they also make a very serious killing. They are businesses make very serious profits. So here they make losses, but after they make, because then they are being given business deals, they are being given public procurements without actual processes. You've seen some of the letters circulate on your social media where the construction of a road, of key infrastructure and key decision makers in the country are saying, no. I have talked to these people and I have found that they are competent. Please forget about the public procurement rules. Give them that infrastructure project to deal with. So that's a real challenge. So consequently, we must have regulated financing for our political activities. We must have regulated financing for our political activities. Even if I only have 20 minutes. We must have regulated political financing for our activities. Very important. And not only should that regulation be in place, but we should know where NRM is getting this money that Henry is always talking about. Trillions of shillings, billions of dollars, where FDC is getting this money, where NUP is getting this money. If it's coming from the US embassy, yes, let them tell us, so that we know if Bobby Chagulanyi, he's even my student, former student. If Honorable Chagulanyi is saying certain things, then we will know that possibly the financing that he has got from this place is influencing why he's saying so. But at least it will be transparent. Everybody will know that's one of the reasons that's informing his decision making. And then we will take him on, because his interests are not in the US. His interests are where? Here in Uganda. For us, his interests are for us to benefit us as Ugandan citizens. So some of the sources I'm indicating there include public or private sources, but obviously here in this discussion, I'll concentrate on the private sources, because the private sector then is in the realm of private sources of funding for this money. So the international framework has that provision. I didn't want to bore you because I'm a lawyer, I like citing provisions, but I'm sorry. But it indicates that there must be transparency in the activities of political parties. And this is the whole convention that has very, very many countries that have assented to it, that have signed it. It has the force of law worldwide. So whatever provision that you find in there has the force of law on each member country that has signed this convention. So it says there that transparency in the funding of candidates for elected public office, and where applicable, the funding of political parties. There must be transparency in these activities. It cannot be this hidden arrangement of Kwagalana and so on. The Indian community, they disappear into State House. We don't know at what time of the night what they are cutting. We must know, because it concerns us. So you also have the ICCPR. The ICCPR is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 25 discusses electoral activities, discusses citizen participation in the governance of a country. You also have many other treaties on human trafficking, terrorism, money laundering that discuss the issue of campaign financing, but that have a relation to political financing. You can find some of these examples of dirty money in South America. So in some of the South American states, mafias have taken over some of the decision-making in governments, because there is no regulation of that money and how it comes into the issue of politics or governance of the country. So you find that you have mafias, you have traffickers, you have drug dealers who are financing politicians, who then take up positions, who then take orders from these criminal syndicates. But obviously we must guard that against it, because it can happen here. And in Kenya, it has happened. You can look at it. In Kenya, it has happened with, I think, the previous government or the Kibaki government. So we also, at Africa level, we also have that convention, the Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, 2013. It prohibits illicit financing of political parties and also advocates for transparency. Henry has been talking about transparency here. This convention and the others that I'm going to mention in the next slide, which are sub-regional. When I say sub-regional, it means West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, are not specific to political financing. They are broad conventions that discuss corruption generally. And as you well know, aware, there are various forms of corruption. There's petty corruption, there's grand corruption, there's political corruption. There's all manner of corruption. The women recently have also come up with one called sextortion. There's corruption that involves sex. And increasingly, there are also forms of corruption beyond the kind that we're talking about here. So the challenge with these Africa conventions and sub-regional conventions, we have the SEDAC protocol there, we have the guidelines and principles, which are quite recent. We also have the ECOWAS protocol on corruption. At EACU level, we have the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Bill. It was passed in 2021, and it's waiting assent by the Summit of Heads of State. But it's not purely an issue of general corruption. I think they're discussing more of corruption within the Secretariat of the EAC, because there's been a lot of corruption. There's been a lot of corrupt activities within there. Possibly with time, we hope that it will be expanded to take care of all the other forms of corruption. I've already indicated that. So at national level, when you look at the African level, you find that the national legal regimes gravitate between the libertarian and egalitarian ideology. And I'm going to shortly explain that. So the libertarian ideology is, as you hear, it's very liberal. It indicates that if you're very strict with these campaign finance activities, then you're violating people's right to free speech and association. People must freely associate. People must freely speak. People must freely mobilize for monies to do whatever it is they want. So that's the ideology. And consequently, then, if you talk about campaign finance, then you're going to find very weak regulations because of that mind view. And as a result, you have very few people taking decisions. You have a very small cabal of people, whether it's a family or an individual or a clan or a tribe, that are making decisions. And that's very predominant on the African continent. And the US, by the way, is also very popular for this, because they allow people to fundraise as and when they wish. Though there are limits on the various categories. I don't have time to go into that. So the egalitarian approach has many countries in Europe using that. And for it vouches for very restrictive management, very, very regulated management of money in politics. And you have countries like Germany that go with this approach. There are very few countries on the African continent that have this approach. Tunisia is one of the very few countries that has that approach. Initially, with the coup that happened, Arab Spring, with the coup that happened against Ben Ali, you have Tunisia being very aware of its democracy values, and consequently, initially, they indicated that there was not to be any single cent coming from private sources that would fund their political leaders or political parties. But then with time, they thought it would be challenging because you see the government doesn't have all the money, and yet for their genuine political activities that require money. So they have now scaled back on that and have allowed a window for private sources, for money from private sources. But initially it wasn't there. The politicians, the political parties were complaining that their monies that had been given from the public purse wasn't enough. So they've allowed a small window for Tunisia. So Tunisia is one of the few countries that allows that. Worldwide, you could also talk of Israel. Israel also about 98% of its money its money that circulates within political parties and political candidates is public money. So only about 2% is from private sources, and it's highly regulated. So I've already indicated the sources. It can be from public or private. So one of the key issues is there in funding. If you're talking of a regulatory framework here, especially on the African continent, you're going to find countries that have limits on how much you put into your purse as a political party. Uganda is one of those countries. I've given you a country that totally had abandoned any private money. That's Tunisia. It was the only country on the African continent, but now it has scaled back to a small percentage from private sources. You have other countries that have a mix of public and private. Uganda is one of those. Then you have other countries that only deal with private sources of funding. There is no public funding at all. The other thing that you'll find in all of these national regimes is that they usually have spending caps for political parties and independent candidates. I don't think we have that in Uganda. And then the other issue that you find, Kenya has it. The other issue that you'll find is financial reporting. So after you spend, before the elections, after you spend the money, you must account. Here I know that political parties account annually, I think according to Section 10 or so, 12 or 10 of the Political Parties and Organizations Act. But many countries, you have, after you've spent, you have to report, usually to an election management body, which then scrutinizes your state accounts. And then the auditors also must verify that whatever it is that you're saying is indeed what you're saying. The idea is to have integrity in terms of how you're spending money as a political party or as a politician. But I'm going to come to the other challenge of that reporting is that many of the African countries, you have cash transactions. There are very few countries where cash transactions can be rejected. South Africa is one of them. There are certain thresholds of monies where you will not transact. Actually, South Africa is one of the few countries where if you have US dollars, it may become very challenging for you to use them, even just on the street. I've been to a couple of African countries. I've not been to another country that is that restrictive in terms of how its money moves about. But many other countries, including Uganda here, if I'm a politician and you have put up these rules, spending caps, all I have to do is go with the Honorable, my mama there, go with Henry, go with the Mzee there, and him, and if all of us divide up the monies, the US dollars, into so much, then the other one comes from Kisoro, this one comes from Busia, the other one, and then we come here and we begin to use it for our political party. So in terms of reporting, we may have challenges with that. But also we may have challenges with the illicit financial flows. I've talked of South America that has challenges with dirty money that's coming from trafficking, that's coming from drug dealing. Then I've talked about the audit oversight. In Uganda here, the Auditor General must audit your books. In other countries, you find it's the electoral management body or the Auditor General or Parliament or the courts, the electoral courts. Then in all the regimes here on the continent, you have sanctions, and 40 countries provide for fines if you do not abide by the rules, loss of public funding. If you don't abide by the rules, 17 countries do not give you public money again until when you make amends with that. Imprisonment, you have 34 countries on the African continent that will imprison you if you do not comply with the rules on political financing. I've given the example of Tunisia. I've given the mix. By the way, for Tanzania, it's the Minister of Internal Affairs who decides how much money you spend. It's very interesting. You can look at their 2010 Act. Then, as I've indicated, in other countries, you have total private funding. What are the sources of funding? If it is private funding, you have membership fees. I belong to a political party here. I don't know whether the NRM is faring very well via membership fees. but there is no political party that survives as a result of membership fees. Maybe in South Africa, you have the ANC that collects a bit of money and a couple of other places. You have self-funding, and self-funding here can also create a problem since we're talking of the private sector, because you have individuals who are extremely rich, who have no limit on how much they can give to a political party. So they can come and give. And I had a conversation with a colleague the other day, and they were saying, but we're in a very poor country. Just imagine there are people who have hundreds of millions of dollars. If we did not regulate how money gets into politics, and one came with $200 million or 300, we may capture some of our key government institutions. And it's a private individual. Because we know of billionaires, we know of people who have 500 million. There are very, very many people. So it's a very serious issue. If, for example, you're talking of self-funding, but the self-funding has no limit. This member of a political party has no limit on how much money he can give to the party. Then you have foreign donations. Uganda here has limitations on that. Then you have corporate donations. 12 countries on the African continent refuse that. They do not allow corporate donations because of what Henry was talking about. Policy and state capture by those corporations if they are very, very wealthy. The example I've been giving of individuals could as well apply to corporations. If the corporation is very wealthy and you have no limits on how much they can pay NRM, they will pay so much. And I've given examples there. For example, Uganda, if I give you the example of the Indian Association, Professor Luanga Lunyigo has written a book called Uganda, an Indian Colony. And in that book, he says, and by the Professor Luanga Lunyigo is not the opposition, he's seated, I think, right in State House. And in that book, he says 34,000 Indians in Uganda are in charge of 62% of Uganda's economy. And many of these Indians are in the manufacturing sector. And many of these Indians belong to the Indian Association in Uganda. 62%. I don't know what, I haven't looked at the population clock by Uganda Bureau of Statistics, but I think we're about 43 million Ugandans. So if these 34,000 Indians are in charge of 62% of our economy, and we're maybe 43 or 46 million Ugandans. If we do not see how they are dealing with the President Museveni, how they are dealing with the BSJ, how they are dealing with the Honorable Chagulanyi, what can they do to us? What can they do to us in view of the fact that they have these amounts of money and that they are meeting them, they are taking tea here, they are going to their houses, and these are the Indians, Indian factories, Indian-owned factories that should be giving us taxes. So if they go to State House and they got tax exemptions, what will that do to our tax collections? What will that do to our policies? What will that do to our national agenda as a country? You've heard they are saying, okay, let me not go there. I don't want to be quoted. And since there are very serious laws being passed. Okay, anyway, so you have 12 countries that prohibit donations from corporations. You have no data for Comoros, Djibouti, Swaziland. I've given examples of Botswana. There's a corporation there that does diamonds called De Beers, and it has kept the political party in Botswana ruling for the longest time possible. It's one of the longest ruling parties on the African continent. You have South Africa, you have ANC with Heritage Power, which allegedly bought shares on behalf of a company, but was found that this money eventually ended up in the ANC. You have Bosasa that gave money to Cyril Ramaphosa when he was a candidate. You have the Democratic Alliance is one of the key opposition parties in South Africa. It's more white-leaning. When I say white-leaning, I mean white people leading. They received money from a German businessman, and this money was brought to the public, and it was considered illegal money, illegal financing. You have the state capital inquiry that I've just talked about. In Kenya, you have Martha Karua. BAT gave her a lot of money when she was a presidential candidate in the previous elections, I think 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And it was found that that was illegal money. And so I'm told I have 7 minutes. So I'm going to rush through this quickly. Actually, this is the substance. So, but I need to give that context. So what can the private sector do? What role can it play? And it depends on whether your approach is libertarian or egalitarian. So if it's libertarian, then they can give all the money that there is, but I've indicated the challenges of that. If it is egalitarian, then the private sector will play a very lively role, a very transparent, lively role, because we shall know how the private sector is dealing with our key government persons. And I indicate that there. So I'll not go into it since there is very little time. So I've indicated there that third parties include the private sector. And if you have taken the egalitarian approach, then you must restrict how the private sector then engages with government institutions. Europe is doing this. They are lobbying regulations, and those regulations say when the Indian Association of Uganda takes tea with our president at State House, we must know what have they discussed. There is a public register to know what activities have taken place. Obviously, people say, but this is the head of state. He must meet people in confidence and blah, blah, blah. But we're saying those rules in Europe, the lobbying regulations say if you are going to lobby for something, if you're going to lobby for a tax exemption, if you're going to lobby for a tax incentive, if you're going to lobby for better policies, we, the citizens, must know what you're doing with our president. If you're taking tea with the executive director of Uganda National Roads Authority, and you are the executive director of a road construction company, and you are in a grand imperial, you must tell us what tea you took, how you took it, and what you are saying. You file. In Europe, they are doing this. Why? To avoid illegal money getting into public situations where then it is used for interesting purposes. I've already talked about that, so I'll not go. And I've already talked about transparency, so I'll not go there. I'm talking about the lobbying regulations. So what are the recommendations for dealing with this? I've talked about the lobbying regulations. I'm indicating to you that in Europe, they are already happening. And if Henry here has some money, he can hire some expert to do a bit of study in that area. And then we shall know how we proceed in this area, which activities are confidential if the president meeting the Indian Association, which activities should they then declare to this registry, so that all of us citizens who want to know how the president is dealing with the Indian Association go to the registry and find out. Transparency in the rules. I've indicated if you're taking tea with the UNRWA director, we should know and what you're discussing. Then there is a challenge there. South Africa has this challenge. So you have individuals who are in public institutions, who are in key sensitive public institutions, and then transition to a private company, but which private company then that gets a tender from this very public institutions the fellow has left from, or fellows have left from. So they have used their insider knowledge that there is a serious tender about to happen, a mega deal about to happen. So then they resign and create a company to do that, and then they are awarded that very work. So you and then it works both ways. You have people who are in the private sector and have intimate knowledge of something happening, and then they join the public sector. A country like South Africa has these challenges, so we should deal with that. Obviously, it raises issues of conflict of interest, but largely it raises an issue of corruption. Then academia, civil society, and the media here have a very serious role to play in sensitizing the public about this topic. I've told you of a whole professor in governance, very eminent, who told me that this was a useless topic. Actually, he was saying that I should be failed for my thesis. And the other people said, no, this is a very serious issue. Commercialization of politics is a very serious issue. And that's how I managed to survive to get my document. So the media, civil society have a very serious role to play. I said at regional Africa and sub-regional, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, we have protocols on corruption, we have conventions on corruption, but they are not specific to this very serious issue. Why? Because the people who are the beneficiaries are the ones making the laws. But some of us now who are outside those spheres should begin to talk about these issues. So we would need a specific and comprehensive law that deals with political finance as a standalone issue at Africa level, at sub-regional level, ECOWAS, East African Community, SADC, that deals with these issues. But not just passing the protocols, because now like the protocols are there. There's one on elections, they say a few things and then it ends there. There must be structures under those protocols that then try to implement these things, but also get do benchmarking activities that then feed off each other from each country. What is the best practice in Tunisia? What's the best practice in South Africa that we can borrow as Uganda? That kind of thing. Then we'll have better policies. Then the issue of intelligence sharing, obviously intelligence organizations are already doing this. There's a Financial Intelligence Authority to deal with the dirty money that I was talking about, where a government can be captured by criminals. But also from the political finance side, it is important that we deal with it. Then international actors. There are organizations that have a lot that have done marvelous work in this area. An international idea is one of them. I know Henry and his organization use a lot of their work. I use a lot of their work too. International Idea has done a lot of activities on the African continent at domestic level. You also have Transparency International that does a lot of activities around political finance. So what has this address shown? It shows that the private sector has a role to play, yes, but that role has to be regulated. Because if it's not regulated, it will lead to policy capture, it will lead to state capture, it will lead to inflation, it will lead to corruption, and it will lead to inadequate social services because the money that ordinarily we should share, all of us as citizens, is being taken away by these few individuals. And obviously it can derail our national development goals and democratic values as a country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Another round of applause. You began by telling us that campaign finance is a regulated public good, and you did conclude by telling us that indeed, private sector has a role to play, but their role should be regulated. That said, let me request you to take your seat, because now, yes, at the front, because we are now entering into a session of having the panel discussants, partly referring to your conversation, but also responding to specific questions. Allow me, like I did promise, to recognize other participants in the room. We have someone coming from the Uganda Revenue Authority. I think she's around, and I'm so sure she's interested in the figures you did read, that 34,000 Indians are in charge of 62% of Uganda's economy. Interesting. We also have a representative from the European Union. You're most welcome, sir. And then someone coming from the Royal Norwegian Embassy. I think you are most welcome, sir. All right. Gentlemen and ladies, we are now entering into another very interesting session where we discuss specific questions on this bigger subject of private sector and political financing in Africa, looking at specific areas that interact with private sector and political parties in Africa, or political financing in Africa. Allow me to also recognize someone from NBI. You are most welcome. I hope my panelists that are in the room are available. Let me start with the ones I can see. And I'm going to ask, in no specific order, but let me start with those that are physical, because we have also virtual panelists. Let me start with Issa Sekito, who is no stranger to most of you. Please take your seat. And as he takes his seat, allow me to introduce Mr. Issa Sekito, who is a professional certified accountant. Is the speaker of Kampala Seated Traders Association, commonly known as CASITA. It's the leading organization that brings together traders in Uganda. Mr. Issa Sekito is also the Director of Trade and Commerce at the Private Sector Foundation Uganda, also serves at the board. He is also the Director at Comesa Business Council. He is the official representative of the Gabriel Registrar, which is an international ISO certification organization. If you can't find Issa Sekito in any of the above offices, be sure you'll find him at Kato and Company Limited, where he is dealing in trading and importing, and where he is the owner and the director. Mr. Issa Sekito, you're most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Also, allow me to recognize and introduce Honorable. Once a honorable, always honorable. Honorable Jova Kamateka, who is the former woman member of parliament for Mitoma district, served for 2 terms, 2010 and up to 2021. She's also the former undersecretary for the Uganda Law Reform Commission. Honorable, take your seat as I further introduce you. She holds an honorary doctorate degree from the Commonwealth University and London Graduate School. She also holds a master's in business administration from Isami Institute. She has a master's in public administration from Makerere University. She's a trainee of the senior managers in government at Harvard University. But while at Parliament, where many of you know her from, she chaired a number of parliamentary committees, among which we had the Human Rights Committee, Equal Opportunities Committee, the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee, and the Finance and Budget Committee. You are most welcome, Honorable.
Thank you, but correction, I chaired only the Human Rights Committee.
Oh, you chaired.
For the others, I was only a member.
for 7 years. Okay, thank you so much for the correction. Also, allow me to introduce another Ugandan who is participating virtually due to flight challenges, John Walugembe, and I hope the team can be able to, yes, he's on call. He is the current executive director of the Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises, an umbrella body of all SMEs in Uganda. Mr. John Walugembe is a scholar of Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government, with a master's in public admin, looking at development, economics, and public policy. He's also a graduate of Oxford University with an MBA in finance and economics. He has previously worked, for those who don't know, with Uganda Small Scale Industries Association, commonly known as UZIA, as the executive director, and also at one point was the head of business development at the Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. John Walugembe, I know you're on call. You are most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Now, let me introduce the other panelists. We have another expert, a lady. I hope I get this name correct. You'll help me. It's Noxolo Kwala, who is an expert on inclusive electoral processes and the use of technology in elections. She currently works with Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, EISA, based in South Africa. She is the architect behind establishing and mainstreaming EISA's relations with political parties and civil society organizations across Africa. And I hope you've also had a chance to interact with political parties back here in Uganda. She's an advisor to the African Union and regional economic communities on methodological approaches to observing elections and promoting the incorporation of technology for collecting and disseminating election data. She has observed a number of elections, making assessments, notable the elections in DRC in 2018, the one in Egypt in 2015, the one in Kenya, recent one of 2022, and the one of 2017, among others. She also holds a master's in international relations from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Sorry for the mishap in pronunciation. You are most welcome. Wala on. You're on call. I hope you can hear me. You are much welcome. Thank you so much for being part of this. The last panelist that I have is Dr. Kojo Asante, who is both a scholar and a governance specialist. He also holds a doctorate in development policy and management from the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom, and also a scholar from the University of New York in Africana Studies. Also has a law degree from the University of Buckingham in UK and is a research fellow at the University of Manchester. Dr. Kojo is a trained barrister and a member of the Ghana Bar. He is the current director of advocacy and policy engagement at the Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana. He has previously managed the coalition of domestic election observers observing elections in Ghana in 2008, 2016, and 2020. He's also the current chair of the Right to Information Coalition, which is a multi-member CSO platform that promotes effective implementation of the Right to Information Act in Ghana. Dr. Kojo Asante, you are welcome. With our panel constituted, Allow me also to take my seat so that we can now have a very interesting conversation. For our online audience, you can still send in your comments and questions and be part of this conversation. We are live on YouTube at ACFIM-UG, Twitter at ACFIM-UG, and also Facebook at ACFIM-UG. Gentlemen and ladies, because we have two ladies, this is where we make sense of the keynote address, but with specific concerns and discussions. And allow me to start with Honorable Jova Kamateka. Okay, we are back on, and for our online audience, sorry for the mishap. I was sharing with the physical audience that that's a reminder that we are in Africa, our beloved continent. Before we had a mishap, I had taken the liberty to make Honorable Jovia Kamateka to be the first in the firing line for many reasons. But for starters, for the reason that it's important we discuss, picking it up from where the keynote address left us in terms of the legal frameworks and corporate financing. Help us understand if a private company said no, and I had a reason why I'm not firing this question to Issa Sekito, but I'll come back to Issa Sekito on this one as well. If a private company said no to the request of campaign finance donation, what are the chances it will continue to operate in that country or in that jurisdiction?
Thank you very much. Of course, it depends on who approaches the company. If it is the government in power and not private individuals, it may have problems continuing to operate in the country. But if it is individuals, then it will continue operating. Secondly, it matters whether there are laws and regulations guiding that kind of engagement. But if there are none, then the private company can defend themselves. Maybe we do not have money, maybe this and that, and they can get away with it. But if they were, can I say, obligated, I don't think they would be obligated. But yeah, I think they would have problems if the government in power asked for financing, campaign financing, and they said no. That would mean that if we go through and we continue the government in power, then we cease to give you favors.
Thank you so much. The same question I'm going to throw it to.
But before you go to Mr. Sechito,
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you to the keynote address speaker, and to agree that this is a very important topic that affects all of us and should be indeed addressed. The rest, yes, we need the campaign regulating, but in Uganda here, I think we will discuss it and see. I think the bigger challenge is how do we make it happen? How do we make it happen? I think you also alluded to the fact that it's not a matter of having the protocols in place. You must make sure that the protocols are implemented. So how do we make sure? I think the bigger challenge in Uganda is how do we make sure that the protocols, if you put laws in place, they will be implemented. Thank you. I think I have overstepped that question.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. The same question I'll throw it to Issa Sekito, whether, and from a practical experience, whether companies that that turn down the opportunity to finance political parties, whether they continue to function normally.
My name is Issa Sekito, as you said and rightly mentioned. I am very grateful to meet Mr. Waliemera Daniel. I've been hearing about him in the academic sector. I've several lawyer students from several institutions, and also heard about him in the former political party, former in quotes. In fact, I am speaking for many institutions, but for Katsita particularly, we have been victims of money in politics for the years we have been in existence, 20 years, until the president of Uganda recently announced publicly that he came out to fight us because we declared Kasita an apolitical institution. It is a crime in Africa, and especially in a place where I live, to sideline sponsoring a government in power. I will tell you, whether regulated or non-regulated, it would be very difficult for a business from which a government agency would like to get money for political campaign to survive. Because all irregular means, from irregular audits, from framed cases of very high caliber, and all sorts of atrocities will be committed on you until you give up. I don't want to mention names of traders who tried to sponsor opponent parties and are now history because of the intelligence network of government that traced them, and immediately after elections they completely were audited by the Revenue Authority, and they could not withstand the outcomes of the audits. Therefore, it becomes very tricky as to whether to support or not to support, because from the words of Daniel, it has advantages if you sponsor, because scratch my back and scratch yours, but all this happens at the expense of the entire public for which we aspire to lead. I should have been an MP maybe from Bamnanka County, because the person that is there now was my campaign manager. I should have become a mayor, a Lord Mayor of Kampala, for the support that I have among the business people. But what has failed me and is still failing me is the unregulated financing of politicians. I have a big family. And when you look at my budget and I analyze how much I need to put to become an MP, my children cannot go to school. So I was looking out for a process that can be regulated so that the constituents are guided into helping with the logistics, and then I can become a leader who is accountable to them. As to whether this can be realistic in Kampala here, in Uganda where I stay, is a nightmare. Therefore, to give you an outright answer, I can mention behind camera a number of companies that have succumbed to this and now history in the records of the taxpayer, just because the intelligence have it that they did not sponsor political campaigns. The Kwagarana group and the other groups, when they look out for money, you take there a proposal that you have sick people. Take a proposal that it is now a drive for any health facility, you will see them elusive. Just gather them for a presidential meeting towards campaigns, and all the land cruisers and the expensive cars will go to where the president is. This is not a secret, unless you don't want to say it to the letter, but it's not a secret, you can't. So who is that stupid person who is a beneficiary of that will not know that Sechito Issa, who has billions of money from the intelligence we have, did not sponsor me? Things cannot go very well. So it is really very difficult in Africa. Let me leave alone Uganda. To survive as a big entity when you do not support the regime in power. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's a submission from someone who interacts on a daily with traders, with businessmen. Let's cross to, I hope I can have Kojo on call. Because now let's a bit talk about the corporate capture in this case. And if Kojo you're on call, help us paint a picture when it comes to the big and multinational companies sponsoring political parties, which is a common phenomenon in Africa. What is the danger? What danger do we face when we have big and multinational companies sponsoring political parties and candidates in Africa? From where you stand. Dr. Kojo, are you there?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. Yes, good morning, and good morning to your to other panelists. I think the dimension for foreign capital is, even complicates an already very complicated political arrangement. I think all of us know that in most of our countries, we tend to practice a winner takes all system. Political parties or governments come in and basically completely try to dominate every opportunity or access to resources within the state, and completely sidelines everybody else, and then put a system in place to stop any kind of effort by the opposition or whoever might be a competitor to try to get resources to challenge or contest them in elections. So you already have that at play. And then when you get big, foreign capital coming in, then the kinds of monies that becomes available can't even overwhelm, just a normal politician. So there you are worried now about, what kinds of influence these institutions or organizations can have on individual decision makers, individual politicians, who can sometimes go to the extent of selling their state, their whole society, for for the kind of monies that are promised. And it's a much difficult issue to have, because there are some companies, their turnover is much bigger than 10, 20 countries put together in Africa. And if they intend to influence any kind of actions, it can be very difficult to resist. So this is a dimension that is very important, and I think it's been even further complicated in the multipolar world that we are in. So if you look at recent foreign direct investment to Africa, I think 2021, some of the statistics show close to about 83 billion that went to Africa. But if you consider that you are having this kind of competition, almost sometimes going to Cold War type environment, where whether it's the Americans, it's the Chinese, the Turkish, the Saudis, the Russians, everybody's trying to get a stake in Africa. You can imagine the complication around party finance and how that influences that process. So it's a very challenging environment.
Of a conference I was in where they were discussing the resilience of Africa in the face of the growing influence of multinational companies, pointing out countries like that are coming from specific countries like China and Russia, and their implications on the way they finance and influence the politics at play. And I think I shall come back to that when I'm having a question for you in the next round. But quickly, I hope Kuala is online, because Kuala, if you're online, help us. Yeah, you're online. Great. Why do most political parties and political candidates find foreign capital into politics an attractive source of political financing? And this is from experience, whether it is regulated or not. Most political parties and political candidates don't mind receiving finances from foreign sources. Why do they find this very attractive?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think good morning, first of all, to you, the panelists, and everyone else who is joining us. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this panel. I think it's important to start with primarily the fact that public funding, countries that provide public funding to political parties, have very limited resources to start with. And therefore, this makes foreign capital highly attractive as well, in terms of ensuring that political actors are able to compete, because politics is about competition first and foremost, are able to compete, albeit at an unequal playing field. And it is quite interesting, because I think as Democrats, or people working in the democratic space, we always put a lot of emphasis on this issue of all political actors should start from an equal playing field. But primarily, we know that if I, as a politician, want to compete and I want to win, and because usually the nature also of our electoral systems also is a very zero-sum game, it makes sense for me to want to start on an unequal playing field, to start at a further level than where my fellow competitors would be at. And therefore, foreign capital brings that. And the fact that also a lot of the times when political actors are talking to these foreign actors, we hardly know what is being discussed. There's hardly any need for accountability from their electorates as well, in terms of disclosing what are some of the terms and so on that are contained when they receive those kickbacks, or what we call that foreign capital. So I think at first and foremost, I mean, the basic answer would be the fact that we have really limited, we've got scarce public funding, and therefore it makes sense then for political actors to look elsewhere, to look abroad, to actually give themselves an unfair advantage, to actually make sure that they are able to then go on and compete and get the reins of power. So that is how I'd answer that. Thank you.
I'm going to come back to you on the question of the danger in that. But John Walugembe, I know you're on call, and you head the Federation of Small Medium Enterprises that feel an electoral fever season. And from your experience, first of all, are political donations a necessary evil for business acquisition? As in, if you want to get business in, for example, in Uganda, is there a way you can do this without donating to political parties or political candidates? Or should we say this is part and parcel of doing business and it's a necessary evil and should be factored in when you're doing business? Not only in Uganda, but let's say also in Africa. What's your take?
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that the relationship between business and politics is rather complex. Most business people, including ourselves, we try to avoid the murky waters of politics and generally discussing political kinds of issues. However, businesses cannot avoid engaging in politics. And I would say that governments have a mandate to produce public goods, which in economics we say they are non-exclusive, excludable, and non-rivalrous. It means that you cannot say you don't access. If you build a road, it will be accessed by everyone. Therefore, the private sector cannot undertake these tasks. These tasks are reserved for government. Now, for government to work in the multi-party dispensation that you are in, my understanding is that political parties are supposed to be associations where, members come together and contribute to run their own party. Unfortunately, most of the political people in Uganda, politics has become a business on its own. So basically, people gamble. You mortgage your house, you stand for elections. If you lose the elections, you can get imprisoned because you can get imprisoned and really hit rock bottom. And then when people join political parties, they expect to gain, not to give. So that's why you see people saying, oh, me, I've sacrificed a lot. I've worked for this thing. I've worked for this, because they look at political parties really as an avenue to eat. So then the political parties have to rely on what we call friends to sustain them. And among these friends are the private sector, because the private sector, both at the national and the subnational level, are the people that will be making the money, and therefore tend to be easy targets. Now, why are businesses interested in politics and generally in financing politicians? I think one, some businesses are just victims of extortion, especially at local level. Local politicians might be standing, then they come and tell a local SME, if you don't give me this money, you'll wait and see. If I win, you'll wait and see. So there's that element where there's a bit of extortion. People go around and say, you must contribute. If you don't contribute and stuff, there's that level. Then there's the level where the businesses actually want to be in the good books of the politicians and therefore influence policy. I think that is not because businesses have legitimate interests and they are allowed to push them. The challenge in our context is that there's no clear mechanism. You see, I would say in the context of, if you look at it with an objective lens, I think the US, for instance, in this area is a worse culprit. If you look at the way big business influences politics. If you look at the lobbying industry in Washington, it's huge. So I would say this is in fact a bigger problem sometimes in Western capitals, because these lobbyists determine policy much better than here. The only problem back home is the lack of structure. You know, you don't know, if I give this person this much, what will they do, and so on and so forth. And then there's the risk of state capture, of course, that if someone gives a lot of money to certain politicians, then they'll control what kind of policies they are going to roll out. Yet some of those policies affect these other businesses. And then there's also the issue of access to procurement opportunities. You know, government is the biggest customer in this, in not just in Uganda, but in Africa and around the globe. So as a business, you want to ensure that you are able to benefit from that pie. So you do whatever is possible. Of course, legitimately, business engaged in lobby and advocacy, sometimes through associations like ours, for policies that we think are critical for their survival. But then businesses, as I said, can also make campaign contributions in order to influence certain things. Personally, I don't think that's a problem. The important thing is to ensure that it's regulated and that it's transparent. And I wouldn't say we are in worse shape, because in certain other jurisdictions, in my view, they have to perform worse than in our area. The only problem here is the lack of regulation and the opaqueness of the whole thing. So you don't know, once the politician comes and says, oh, this is the policy, you don't know whether he's under the influence of one business person, or he's actually doing it for the sake of the people who voted him, or for the sake of the general public. So I think for businesses, therefore, it's difficult for you to for certain politicians to say please contribute, and you say no, because then you may appear to be, you know, a saboteur. But I don't think in many cases, especially for small businesses, that it's either government or political party policy or whatever. No, because of the lack of regulations, I think even some local politicians take advantage to blackmail and to extort from these local businesses. At the national level, there's a bit of more structure. The only difference is that because of the polarization of our politics, it's very difficult for business to say I'm contributing to X, I'm contributing to X, I'm contributing to Y. No, I think that becomes very, very complex, and most business persons wouldn't want to come out to be seen to contribute to particular groups, most of those groups that are not in power or that are anti-government, because then government will look at them as, you know, subscribing to those points of views, and most businesses don't really want to be associated with such. Thank you. I hope I've answered your question. Hello? Hello? Hello?
You recognize we are having intermittent connections. It's the power cuts. But just I need to emphasize that we are training on hashtag money in politics in Africa. You can make your comments, your questions, and also be part of this conversation. Before we had an interruption, John Walgembe was making a point that the problem is around the opaqueness and the lack of regulation, and I'll be coming back to that shortly. And I think I'll throw that question to Dr. Warimera around the regulation. But let me come to you, to Honorable. First of all, from your experience as a person who has contested in politics, help us understand to what extent, when it comes to fundraising for campaign finances, how do you approach the private sector? What is their language, body language? And when they are financing you, what are their expectations? What do they expect in return? Are these genuine people financing you to become their leader, to perform your mandate as a legislator, or there are hidden motives and interests? And how do you, in case you become an MP, how do you manage those interests, what we call the quid pro quo arrangements?
Thank you very much. I think we are assuming a lot here that politicians do approach people for financing. For example, I have never approached anyone for financing. But friends, I think one or two people have given me, just pulled out money out of their pocket when somebody gives you like 1 million shillings and says this is for your campaigns. So this issue of being influenced by those who have contributed to your campaigns, that one I will not tell you lies, I do not know. But I think also, maybe for me, it's because I stood on the women's seat. So you bear in mind the kind of interests that you represent. Yes, of course, when you get into parliament, you represent everybody. Even in the constituency, you serve everybody, you represent everybody. But this issue of money, no. And I actually wanted to ask, are we assuming that when companies are asked to give money, campaign financing, that they are coerced to do so? Because I don't think so. You are approached, and it is entirely up to you whether you contribute or not. That's what I want to believe. Maybe I'm naive. But I know, of course, also that if, for example, the party in power asks you, then they expect that you will assist. As to the serious consequences that will follow those ones, I'm not so sure. Maybe I think we will go with what Mr. Sechito said, that some companies have even gone out of business because they did not contribute. I want to believe that people, where we are now in Uganda, that people contribute willingly to campaigns. Secondly, we offer ourselves as individuals. We are not even, yes, of course, we go for primaries and then become flag bearers of parties, and then the party gives you some token assistance for campaign because now you are standing for the party. Other than that, Uganda is not at that point where individual candidates really rely on so heavily on private financing. I'll call it private because you are supposed to approach individuals to finance you, isn't it? Yes. I think to a large extent it is members of your family. Maybe if you have been working, I worked in the civil service, so maybe if there are friends there, they can contribute to you, but willingly. And those who have been your friends, you don't just go approaching everybody asking for money. No, I've not been that type, and I don't know, maybe others have. And I think because we do not have this culture of having private people sponsor you, that's why people end up in debts. They end up selling their own properties and getting debts either from the banks or financial institutions so as to get elected.
Interesting.
That's what I know.
You've not approached the companies, private companies, or
I have
individuals,
not.
but have they approached you?
They have not.
They have also not approached you.
No.
You make it sound very easy to stand in Uganda. But let me come to
maybe because they know I am principled. I'm a person of
okay.
integrity.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think I'm seeing Issa Sekito trying to weigh in on that matter, and as you weigh in on that matter, also, my other question is: from your experience, are the demands for political finances from these companies periodic or they are endless? As in, if I'm a candidate or I'm a political party, I come to you, asking for support.
Okay.
Does it end or they keep coming back?
First and foremost, it depends on where you are. Where I am, I see the political patronage of business in Uganda, where one trades with a letter from higher authorities and is exempt of taxes, where one gets the monopoly of a product because of the patronage, and therefore because of that, others are lured into thinking what to do so that the next business goes to them through the patronage that others have enjoyed. Last week, I received a lady crying to my office. She deals in textiles, she deals in tiles, ceramic tiles. She had paid taxes and they were hyped. She had to make top-ups. Said, Mr. Kasita, you closed the institution. You are no longer helping us. People are offloading tiles and taking them to the manufacturing grounds, that they are raw materials, bringing them back to the market and with impunity. We intervened, and you know what? I don't want this to end into an investigative story. That the story was clearly known by some high authorities in the Revenue Authority, but the people that are doing it are untouchable. And there is nothing you can purely do. So if this woman who is crying
Was she a victim of
paying higher taxes, yet there are people who do not pay because of political patronage in the same product. If this woman had a chance to pay some money, come an election in future and again the same kind of
Advantage.
treatment, definitely she would not hesitate. I will tell you that we have been crying and fighting over monopolization of some products deliberately without principle. Somebody wakes up and says, nobody will trade in Tiger Head batteries from today. Whoever wants to trade in Tiger Head batteries should produce such a letter. Then, while that one is crying, another one comes. I wouldn't want to mention the authorities, but this has been common knowledge in that product that I have mentioned. If it is Mr. Issa who made the letter today, then Mr. Issa's wife also issues another one to somebody in Imbali. You trade in Imbali, let this one trade in Kampala in the same product. And the rest of you who are over 40, go out of this business. Now, you want to tell me that these other Ugandans are not watching. They are watching, and they given an opportunity that there is a way you would get the same advantage, they would definitely go for that. Therefore, it might not be coercive, but there are reasons why you should pay. Or else, I have known of a project which was masterminded by 3 people, presented it to Parliament, to Cabinet and passed. Somebody picked leaf of it and they went into the president. Said, Mr. President, we can't give away this. This is on record. The president wrote a letter to the authority of KCCA saying, please, from the program that I have seen, in my opinion, we should have given this to this investor. Ladies and gentlemen, an opinion of the president is an order to the authorities. People must shot themselves. We sat into mediations into this because people are even pulling guns. These are all rich people. It's a lucrative project in Kampala. I don't want to mention it for security reasons. It went to the one individual. The 3 only got portions of that project. What do you call that? So they are financing. When you hear a list of people giving when elections come, the person who benefited will be on top. What do you call that? So only that, the rest are either poor to contribute to be significant, or they fear and they remain poor. I'm telling you from a live experience, because we interact with the small, the medium, and the big people. Even the big people cry. You bring a project, and then when somebody tips it, and he is in good books with the authorities, then you are gone. Because there is no way you will get that. The other one that you asked, can you repeat it?
Okay.
Yes, there's something that you had asked me that I wanted to
yes. Whether these demands have an end, whether they are endless.
Okay, thank you very much. I think these are periodical. The target electioneering time. My sister doesn't know that many MPs, to pass a policy, ladies and gentlemen, you need to caucus as business people and see how hefty you are so that your idea can be passed. It is on record. I've met all committees. Some committees don't waste your time. If you cannot leave the committee and mobilize your members, forget. There's no justice for you. But this is for this is the routine. But for elections, it's periodical. I will tell you, and these are causing very adverse effects on the economy. In 2011, somebody erroneously printed 2 trillion unofficially, no legislation, no parliament passage, and he floated it for election. 2 trillion was printed illegally. This money distorted the economy, and the following 2 years, Kasita had to close down shops because they were mopping the economy to remove the excess liquidity from the economy. When people get this money, they had it in houses. The banker cannot regulate it.
In cash.
Yes, they cannot regulate. Now they're surrounded by the gun. They build the houses with the strong rooms as if it is the Bank of Uganda, and this money is kept in foreign currency, not to be seen. At the end of the day, the CBR continues to raise. When the CBR is raised because they want to mop the excess liquidity in the houses, at the end of the day, the commercial bank rates always increase. Now look at the rate of buildings that we are forfeiting as collateral. So all this is political money into the economics. The direct answer is, it is very difficult that somebody will force you, but you will force yourself to be on the side of government, unless you want to remain poor. And who wants to be poor? So it is one way of coercing you through action. Where you are very adamant, then the audits will work on you and completely finish you.
Interesting. And that's a confession from a practitioner and someone who is first-hand experiencing these issues. Let's first cross to Ghana. But before we cross to Ghana, just need to make a bit of a clarity here. The hashtag is money in politics. Money politics in Africa. Yes. Money politics in Africa. Sorry for that. Dr. Kojo, do you have a similar challenge in Ghana? Remember, we are comparing what happens across the continent. Do we have similar challenges in Ghana? But also, do you have a law or a legal framework that regulates donations from private sources, private sector? How do you navigate those challenges that our colleagues back here in Uganda have been sharing?
Well, unfortunately, I think we are in the same boat when it comes to legislation and the regime for restricting these type of donations. So, I mean, if you think about the way it works, often is through the procurement system. A lot of these multinationals or foreign capital, where this is a state transacting with an individual or sort of an individual private entity. There are other types of foreign capital that is like state to state, or it involves some concessional loan bilateral arrangement between a multilateral agency like the World Bank and other kind of stuff. So there are different kinds of relationship, or even the Millennium Challenge account But even some of those things can also suffer these kinds of financing complications. But generally, it's the public procurement, and the ones that tend to be very, very vulnerable, where there's a lot of discretion in giving the foreign entity some advantage. So either getting a monopoly, getting a very long-term concession, 20 years, 30 years. There was a recent case that the Africa Confidential reported involving the French billionaire that owns the Bolloré Africa Logistics and controls quite a number of ports along the West African coast. And the company was fined heavily in France for financing a consultancy agency, a political consulting agency that was supporting the re-election of the Togolese president for Gnassingbé Eyadema. So those kinds of examples where it's just direct. It's a quid pro quo. We help you, we fund you, we support you. We get a big concession, get our footprint in Africa, so we can carry on our business and get advantage over our competitors. Airbus was also involved in a similar incident recently, involving the sale of aircraft to Ghana, and one of the officials was in court, basically charged and found guilty on trying to bribe foreign officials. So because the state often has full kind of control over the procurement processes, particularly the use of sole sourcing and then restricted tendering, allows, provides the cover to be able to sort of hold your end of the bargain if you provide the resources for campaign financing, and then I get you the consortium, the concession, or whatever contract. But sometimes it's also regulatory control, that the government might waive some particular step that a company that's coming to the country has to come in and ensure, adhere to. And there are many different things that can basically cost a business, or can increase the costs for a business coming in. And with those kinds of relationships, either you get preferential treatment, or basically you get a waiver. One of the ways that normally happens also tax waivers. So there's a big, I think in the Ghana case, that it was amounting to about 2.6 billion a year or so in terms of tax waivers. And when you see the application of the tax waivers, it's very inconsistent with government's own policies, and doesn't really have a serious sort of transformational impact. But because people are sort of getting these deals, sweeter deals, because they are also providing something for a party also. So the ways these things are done, it's very, very difficult to police them locally. I mean, we just don't have very strong regimes. We haven't developed it. We haven't sort of fleshed it out sufficiently. But even without that, at least some of the international frameworks have led to some of these things being exposed. And I've already mentioned the two cases. So certainly the UN UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, has very, very specific provisions about private sector bribery. And of course, I think the keynote speaker talked about anti-money laundering provisions, that we can have very, very severe penalties for companies. There's also the UK Bribery Act, which is also prohibits the bribery of foreign officials. And it's quite elaborate. It covers all kinds of people, including agents, third parties, and so on. And then there's the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So for U.S. companies, for British companies, for European companies, even OECD prohibitions, there are quite a lot of international regimes that even within Africa, even sometimes governments can report to either the Department of Justice, the US, or to the British Attorney General or whoever, to open an inquiry into a matter where there's a suspicion that somebody has been bribed. So those mechanisms have been used very, very successfully in many countries. But as all the panelists are saying, and I think we've been discussing for a couple of years now, we need to really take this seriously if our democracies are going to survive, because states and multinationals, the agendas can be very big. It can be completely anti-developmental. It can be destabilizing to a country, and to protect that, you have to protect politicians from themselves. I don't know what the going rate for electing an MP now, but if putting down $100,000 or $200,000, or even financing a whole presidential campaign, in our case almost $100 million, is chicken feed to billionaires and multinationals that are dealing with trillions. So if those kinds of options are put in front of most individuals, it will become a very, very difficult prospect, for them to deal with. So we definitely do need regimes that protect, as I said, protect our politicians from themselves, also protect the state from the different kinds of capture that might happen.
On having a regime in place to regulate the way we finance our politics. And I know in the neighborhood, I think Nigeria has done very well. They have a very good law now that is regulating campaign financing. But let's cross to South Africa, because I think they are also trying to regulate, in a way, money in their politics, but they're grappling with what we call state and corporate capture. And Kuala, let me bring you in here on that issue, because first of all, what is the situation like in South Africa? You've observed the elections. To what extent do we have the influence of these big corporations, multinational companies, influence the electoral outcomes in South Africa, the electoral processes in South Africa, including the sovereignty of South Africa as a country? Because I think that's the bigger challenge now, because in Uganda, for example, and many other African countries that I can talk about, Zambia, DRC, I think even here in Kenya, the growing influence of China in the way it is financing big infrastructure projects in our countries. But how do we then ring-fence that influence not to extend in our politics and also become a danger to our as being states that are not influenced by external actors?
Thank you for that. Generally, here in South Africa now, we have a law in place coming through as a result of really a serious push from civil society in terms of saying that foreign funding especially needs to be regulated. We need to know who is funding, which businesses are responsible for funding the politicians that we elect or the political parties that we elect. And with that said, so in 2019, we saw the president passing on the bill, Ramaphosa passing on the Public and Political Party Funding Act, which basically contains a component of public funding seeking to, of course, allocate the public funds based on the power that the performance of a political party at the polls. And then on the other hand, the new component that was introduced to this framework is the private funding aspect, which says that basically we want to hold businesses, so both businesses and political actors, accountable, because citizens have the right to know who their parties are being funded by. And this was really an effort of limiting the undue influence of money, especially towards election time. And also, of course, because of the serious state capture that was happening as a serious drawback in terms of development here in South Africa. And therefore, what this act seeks to do, and I've been following it very closely, is that it seeks to basically enhance transparency and accountability from all political actors in terms of how they handle their party finances, and it is throughout the electoral cycle. We hope, of course, that it would reflect positively in terms of the governance record. But in a nutshell, political parties are now having to have legit bank accounts with accounting officers, and on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months, they have to provide statements that report how much they've received. And it also puts on any private funds that you receive which exceed 100,000 rands, that's around $5,000, you have to disclose. On an equal measure as well, any business that donates such amounts needs to also disclose to the Electoral Commission. So as you can see there, it's really a dual disclosure. It's a responsibility of a business who gives you the money. It's also the responsibility of yourself as a political actor to declare that this is how much I've received from this business and so on. And it's very important because in the most recent general elections we came from, the act was not yet fully enforced. But as we see now, political parties are now really struggling in terms of producing those statements and producing those audited reports and so on to the Electoral Commission. And it begs the question as well, whereby citizens are now starting to think, if political parties in themselves cannot account for how much they receive and what they've received, can we really entrust those people as people that are supposed to be able to hold the coffers of a country together if they can't do basic financial reporting and they are not comfortable in terms of also disclosing to the citizens how much it is that they are actually getting from these private companies. And also in another way, it places a very serious pressure on the businesses themselves, because before it was businesses could donate without knowing that they will not be known. But in purely democratic terms, we have to also think of this aspect that businesses themselves tend to have political interests. And if we want democracy to thrive, what is very ambitious about this act, which I've appreciated, is that it is trying by all means to say that if you've got more than 100,000 to give that money to the Electoral Commission as the funding, and then the Electoral Commission will disperse those funds according to the performance of the political party. In that way, you are funding everyone, because you are saying you are providing these funds in the interest of seeing healthy democratic contestation, healthy democratic transfers of power, and so on. So now it begs the question of, if businesses are still comfortable with just handing money directly maybe to the ruling party or to the opposition party without using the avenue now open to it from the IEC to say, put it in the IEC pocket and IEC will disburse to all the political parties. Because if you are dealing in the country and you are a foreign entity, quite frankly, you should be able to support pure democracy in its purest sense, whereby you don't take sides. So that has been actually quite a very interesting regulation. And I was reading just yesterday that in this third cycle that's open, the IC was expecting these audited reports from political parties, and only 2 so far have complied with the requirement to disclose their sources of funding. So it is very interesting as well in terms of seeing how that will be enforced. And also some political parties, especially the ANC, which is the ruling party here, has blamed this act as part of the reasons why it is suffering financially, not able to pay its own workers and so on. So already this bill, as big of a win as it was for civil society, is already facing serious contestation. And then, of course, when we look as well throughout the continent, I think we also look at the fact that here in South Africa, this act again is really aimed at also looking at the aspect of loans, political parties or political actors that take out loans with these foreign entities, and how those terms and so on that citizens often don't know about actually come back and bite the country concerned long after the elections have been held. So I think that's a very serious factor to consider. So we shouldn't just talk about businesses in terms of foreign direct investment, but very much foreign capital also has a lot to do with the kind of loans that we see being taken out. And also the foreign capital that we have by nature is still strongly linked towards foreign companies that come in and want to invest directly to natural resources that we have in the continent. So, for instance, when the World Bank and the UN, for instance, released the latest stats in terms of foreign direct investment, that 83 billion that basically represented a double increase from 2020. They came out and said that a lot of the countries that have received the bulk share of the FDI have received it because they are all based, they have oil. Or they have mining opportunities and so on. And that's where the foreign capital goes to. And I think, in all honesty, that also raises sentiments of neo-imperialism in our context. And it also begs the question as well in terms of, yes, these foreign companies say they bring business to the continent, but after they leave, what happens? And we've seen that here at home, because in 2020, also Anglo Gold, largest mining company here, announced that they were pulling out from South Africa after 100 years. And when they made that announcement, they cited many factors. Key among them was they were leaving due to labor strikes, uncertainty over the nationalization of mines, and also at that instance as well, it coincided with the fact that the government had just introduced the third mining charter, which was requiring 30% Black ownership for companies that apply for mining rights. So for them, I mean, Anglo Gold was saying mining is just no longer profitable. They're moving to more profitable mines. They cited Ghana. They also cited a few countries also in the Americas. And so then it begs the question as well in terms of us looking at what actually it means for us as well in terms of our own development, because at the end of the day, I think governments or political parties have a double sword, because they have to, on one hand, protect the interests of local businesses, and also protect the interests of these the foreign companies that come in. And with that said, I mean, the sentiment of foreign capital is that, quite frankly, if I have to make an example, it comes with this notion of, I'd rather fund you to extract your diamond or oil, as opposed to I'll invest in seeing you taking out that diamond and polishing it and selling it to me. So that's the reality as well, that it's very difficult for us to really divorce the economics from politics, and for us to say we can do our best to regulate, but at the end of the day as well, there are serious considerations to be taken. And this sentiment in terms of foreign capital and us wanting to limit it, I think is not just arrested only in South Africa. I mean, also as part of our neighbors, also Tanzania as well, really has been asking those questions in terms of when these companies reap from their operations, which are usually very, very lopsided in terms of mainly they seek to maximize their profit. What is the economic contribution? So if you consider these companies and corporates that have been operating in Africa for years and years, what is it that they are still actually leaving us with at the end of the day when they decide to pull out? And also the case of Zambia as well, our neighbors. I mean, their investment flows statistics are showing that they are remaining negative, and for them, a big part of that also was due to the disinvestment from Glencore in the copper mining, citing, of course, that they are looking for more profitable outcomes and so on. So I think we must desist from talking about foreign capital as if it's just a handout, because at the end of the day, foreign capital isn't necessarily a handout. These companies or these foreign entities are expecting more than double profits from their investments. And when you have to look at the fact that you also want to protect your labor, you want to protect your local businesses and so on, it becomes very difficult because the terms and conditions they bring are very unfair. In most cases as well, if they are coming, for instance, to mine in your country and so on, chances are this is a company that is willing to import the inputs that they need. They are willing to import high skills sets from wherever that they have to get them from. And then at the end of the day, you end up finding that they can't even use your local businesses to procure some of the materials and so on that you think a deal will bring. So there are many examples, I think, across the continent whereby we can celebrate and say this is a huge investment that has come in, but when now this company leaves and so on, there's no cushion or setback for the country in question. So I think basically, in a nutshell, it's always important for us to consider this aspect of, yes, we can regulate the foreign capital and so on, but what is the impact on the country as a whole? And also, of course, looking at these loans that are taken out by officials. Also, if I have to go back to Zambia as well, it's very interesting to see that, of course, there can be a peaceful change of power. And we've seen that from the UPND taking over from PF, that the peaceful change was there in terms of the political aspect. But now that political actor that comes in, the new one during the election, they are not exempt from the economic decisions that were made by their predecessors, and therefore we don't start on a clean slate. And I think that has been the biggest issue in terms of the fact that we are in debt within the continent. Besides that 83 billion that has been stated as a big boost in terms of foreign direct investment, we are also very much seriously in debt. Currently, we are owing over 700 billion. And it is very interesting for us to note that it seems like political actors are also residing within countries that basically are in a black hole of debt. And therefore, it's really important for us to try and now make regulations and so on that just encourage responsible financial acts from political parties. And here in South Africa, I think it's been very interesting to see that how do I trust a political party that cannot even keep its own books and think that that political party, when it goes into government, it will be able to make sound financial decisions for the country as a whole. So I think that those are some of the important considerations that I will pose back to you in terms of the questions. Thank you.
You raised an issue of indebtedness as a result of the final the influence of the foreign capital investments. Let me quickly bring in here Walgembe before I bring Kojo to give remarks because he wants to run out. Then I open it up for 30 minutes. And I'll request if there are comments coming through the online audience, they can be flashed on the screen. I'll be picking some of them, but I can also take comments coming from the live audience. But John Walgembe, there's something here that, and I'm really seeking your view in this case around whether state-owned enterprises, how can they navigate the thin line between business and political interests? I'm referring to these companies which, where the state has shares or a stake when it comes to the way they relate in the political environment in an election season, how do they draw the thin line between remaining as enterprises and not being dragged in the politics of the day? John, are you there? Okay, probably John is not online. I'll throw that question to Mr. Issa Sekito, but before I throw it to you, let me give Dr. Kojo just 2 minutes to wrap it up because you expressed your concerns to take leave. Briefly, Doctor. We can't hear you,
Mic is
Doctor.
muted. All right. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, proceed.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, please? Hello? Hello? Okay, all right. Yes, so just some quick points. Yeah, there's just some quick points. Now, I really like the contribution, and also I'm really happy to hear that the South African act is at least has moved forward. Kenya also have been trying to enforce its laws. It's been getting a lot of resistance from the political class and from Parliament. But I think we have to press on, because the dangers are very real. And as I explained, in a polar world, and increasingly getting even more acrimonious, and countries now looking at deglobalization, focusing on more nationalism and so on. There's going to be a lot of pressure in many countries, as states or companies that are supported by states come into the space, and they're trying to gain some control. Progress we have made around beneficial ownership registers within the company code regimes, I think, is also an important area that we can strengthen. I think the more transparency we get about who actually is behind which companies, because one of the ways that foreign capital also try to do the quid pro quo is to provide equity in different ventures for politicians or decision makers, and I think we need to look at that very, very closely. Also, I think the previous speaker did mention it. Internal party regulations, particularly around campaign financing, cannot be self-enforcing. It has to be, by clear legislation, like what has happened in Kenya. A lot of our places is basically operated as an association constitution that regulates these things, and it's not properly enforced because political parties have they're almost governments in waiting all the time. You have to make sure that like charity begins at home. They start understanding the principles and the regimes that are important, to govern a state. So the legislation around internal party politics, around financing and so on, has to also be very, very tight. And together with the external regimes and international regimes, really to tighten the net around the use of money to influence, interest and so on in Africa. So just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the engagement. We have a small working group that we have been looking at campaign financing, and one of the things that business people are saying is, I think they would prefer regulation, Because at this point, even when somebody approaches you and it's a governing party and you say no, you are communicating that you support the opposition. That's the interpretation of it, because you cannot say no. So that creates a very difficult position for a lot of businesses. So you have a transparent process where you can donate. You donate to the bigger project of sustaining the democracy and protecting the democracy. That even if you have a choice just from interest politics to donate, then we should have a cap so that people can donate that to a certain amount for parties. I think some of the proposals that have come is that organizations should not be donating to individuals. You cannot donate to another organization, which may mean a political party. That's a way to kind of create different incentives and then much more accountability in terms of the exchanges between private capital and political parties. So there are ways in which we can learn, I think, from what others are doing outside Africa, but I think we have to also adapt it to our own circumstances so that it can actually be enforced. So thank you, and a real pleasure for inviting me to participate.
Always a pleasure to have you make contributions to this conversation. We allow you to take leave. And like I said, we are moving into the plenary. So comments, questions are welcome to any of the panelists here. We'll be happy to take them. Even those that are coming through the online audience will be able to direct them to the responsible panelists that we have. But before we get into that, I'd asked you, Isa Sekito, to help us. That question around state enterprises, how do they navigate the thin line between politics and remaining as business entities where government has a controlling stake?
Briefly, this is very simple. We need to put rules and regulations, incentives, and advantages equitably. Recently, we launched, I was there when the president was launching a factory for the processing of skins in our home area in Ruero there. And the factory is next to the president's farm. 10 acres of the factory, and the fence is the one that separates it from the presidential farm. It is owned by an Indian who also owns one in Jinja. But when you hear the people speaking about it, the launching, the work plan and everything is being mentioned by State House. You do now not know whether this is a state enterprise or a private enterprise. If a revenue officer, however senior, found an anomaly with such a facility, please forgive that officer, cannot take any remedial action for reasons that you know. So if it is a state enterprise that is sharing with the private, should be clearly known, and we should put incentives in that caliber. Come out openly and say state enterprises are entitled to A, B, C, D. If it is mixed, we have A, B, C, D, E, and for others, you are enjoying this. We have no problem with that. We shall find a way of how to compete with them. And they will also find a way on how to fit in, because ultimately we all want taxes. We want to create a bigger tax base other than a tax burden. If you overprotect politically, for whatever reason, then other enterprises will not grow. And at the end of the day, we shall always be crying of the tax burden widening other than the tax base. So rules and regulations on top of other big laws, like my brother, Mr. Dr. Daniel mentioned, should be supported locally, should domesticate them, so that when it comes to implementation, I know the thin line and I will move across the thin line if I'm a state enterprise, but the guidelines are given by the rules and regulations. They shall all exist. But if it is stated differently on the regulation and implemented to the contrary, then it causes total confusion.
Thank you so much. The hashtag is Money Politics in Africa. You can be part of the conversation happening there. We're also live on YouTube, ACFIMUG, Twitter at ACFIMUG, and also Facebook, ACFIMUG. You can follow the conversations live online. This is why I open it up. There are comments coming through our social media platforms, but also within the audience. If you have any questions, please, this is the time to raise your questions. I'll be taking a couple of questions from the audience, if any, or a contribution. Okay, but as I wait for that to come through, let me quickly come, Honorable. There's something here from your experience as a legislator. You worked on a number of you sat on a number of committees in Parliament, but also you were Ugandan living in Uganda, a practicing politician as well. What is the relationship between corruption in the private sector and political financing?
Thank you very much. I've heard it rumored, and maybe it is partly true, that yes, the private sector does try to influence Parliament through the committees. For example, if there is an issue before the committee that affects the company or private sector, then they want to have a way of influencing them. Sometimes they may call them for a workshop, sometimes maybe find other ways. I've heard it said. But, and I think we have seen cases where a committee have come up with a position only to turn around later and change it. So I think that is true, that it does happen. And I think it is important that we talk about it so that the members are warned and they do not let it continue. Of course, it is said that he who pays the piper
Dictates the tune.
oh, the tune. Yeah, so if you let them give you their money or give you their favors, then they will expect that you will favor them, that the laws that you make will be favorable. There's actually something that Daniel mentioned, that this financing influences the independence of the legislators. Maybe to a large extent it may not come from, yes, both from outside and from within the government, that affects the independence of the legislators. The legislators have four major roles. One is to represent the interests of your people. That's why they send you to represent them. Secondly, legislation, to make laws that propagate the advancement and the well-being of the people. Then to allocate resources to government to ensure that the people get the necessary services for their advancement and well-being. And then to hold government accountable to using those resources in the manner in which they are supposed to use them, and also for government to fulfill its obligation, because every party, when they are standing up for forwarding themselves for elections, they will put a manifesto in place and say, we are going to do ABC for Ugandans. And as Parliament, your role is to hold the government in power accountable to ensure that they do this. But when you accept favors, then the independence is influenced. And also, maybe if you allow me to say, for example, we know now that a lot of money is spent in the elections that these individual members go pay a lot of money to the electorate to be elected. And once they are elected, they cease to take these roles that I have mentioned seriously. Now their role becomes to pay themselves back the money that they injected. And Ugandans should know this. For as long as that you demand money from those you are electing into power, then you are giving them a ticket to go and get lost and just earn money for themselves. Secondly, for example, you can see we have a parliament of 527 people. But when you look at that parliament, sometimes there are about 10, 12, 20. It's only when there is voting that you find maybe about 80 people in parliament, because they are busy putting back the money that they lost during the elections. So it is not of primary importance to them that they represent, sit in that parliament and represent the interests of the people. So Ugandans must know that they are losing out by doing this. Also, now the members of parliament, because they know that when they take the favors to the people, that's when they'll be re-elected. So you find them now acting like the government. You've seen the country littered with ambulances written on members of parliament. Why would I buy an ambulance? That is the role of government. We are supposed to hold government accountable to supply, to provide adequate health services to its people, rather than us taking money from our pocket and provide the ambulances and do roads and this and that. But because we are allowed to be compromised, then we cannot hold government accountable. And if you allow me to end with this, for me, that's the fear that I have with putting the law in place, regulating campaign financing. I was on the legal committee when we considered this. You see, for as long as we are not able to hold government accountable to implement these laws in a free and fair manner.
Who is government in this case? Because if you're
There's the executive, of course.
Okay.
It has the arms of government. We have, for example, the enforcement system, the enforcement agencies. For as long as we do not hold them accountable to enforce these laws, then it is useless putting the laws in place. And we will end up disadvantaging individuals. We will say, for example, you are not allowed to spend more than 300 million for an election. Someone will spend 500 million and will go and allege that the person who even could not raise 200 million has spent more than 300, and they will have them get out of the elections because of that allegation. So, and we have examples. For example, we have the Anti-Torture Act in place, but that has not stopped the
acts of torture.
The implementing agencies like the police and what from torturing Ugandans, and nothing is done. So now when you put this law in place and say we are regulating campaign financing, are you going to have it effectively implemented? That is my major challenge. Thank you.
A very candid reflection on that one. The enforcement. Okay, I'm seeing some hands coming through the audience. Someone help me move the mic. I'll start from here. This gentleman from ANT. Then I'll move to the gentleman from NDI. Someone help me move the mic. If the mic is not around. No, the mic is around. You need to use it for the online audience to hear your submission. Okay.
Hello.
Is there a second microphone that is functioning? Yeah, we need the mics on for the purposes of the online audience. But as the questions come in, there's one question. I don't know whether our game is on set. I don't know whether our game is on set. There's a question I have for you as we wrap up. You can use that one in the meantime. Yes.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Martin Okumo, National Coordinator, Research and Policy for ANT Party. I think we need to look at policy issues to address what we are discussing. Number one, it is on taxation. The way tax administration in Uganda is being conducted is actually the problem that makes government get a lot of money for election from the private sector. Because you see, tax to GDP ratio in Uganda is at 13%. The lowest actually in sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because we have not broadened tax base to make this government sustain itself on tax revenue. So when it comes to political activities, the pressure is shifted to the private sector. The private sector needs to mobilize for government. And that is where the problem is. Because it results into so many things. It results into the business community now begging government for tax waiver and so forth. Because the tax base has been professionally very small, 13% to GDP. When I was a member of the board of National Planning Authority, we suggested, please, register all businesses in Uganda, however small it is, because they will grow and enter the tax base. Also have a good data on all businesses that are at a certain level, especially those whose businesses are big enough to pay a certain amount of taxes, 30% taxes. But as we talk now, it is not there. The Revenue Authority is being praised politically, that they are very successful, they have gone through the tax threshold and whatever. This is wrong. Because why is it that government is also competing with the private sector in borrowing from the commercial banks? Because that is where the private sector should be borrowing, not government. And because of that, you will find that the interest rate to borrow money in Uganda is over 20%, interest rate. Now, tell me which business in Uganda can use this kind of money, make a profit, and then pay the tax and still remain with some money in the pocket. This is where the problem is. So most private sector now would want to associate with senior government officials, would want to be in the political party, the ruling one, so that they can at least survive in the business arena. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think now the microphone is working. NDI, there was a gentleman from NDI here. Let's keep the comments short.
I just have one comment that democratically, the politicians would be looking at the citizens to be able to give them the votes. And also the citizens would be able to hold their leaders accountable because they know they will come back for the votes. But as we are recognizing the situation that's now turning, these leaders don't necessarily now need citizens in one way or another because they can buy them. So those in the politics will now better align to people or individuals or companies that can give them the resources, and which is now dangerous because I will be an MP. I don't need to have all that mandate from the constituents in terms of that I have to do something for them all the 5 years. What I need is some few institutions, some few companies that can give me money, and towards the election, I can then go back and start by. Now, what is the implication of that to the country? It means that the legislators will not do their role, which Madam Honorable you have stated. They cannot do that role. They cannot represent, they cannot do oversight because they are ready for it. And if I can quote Mwalimu Nyerere used to say that there is where you buy a politician before they even go into power. That's the corruption. You buy them earlier but before they get to power. So you want to buy this politician, you want to buy this MP before he becomes an MP. So you will not say that he's corrupt. He will say, no, I'm not corrupt. But he was bought before he became an MP. He used somebody's car to run, to become an LSC5. You expect that person not to give tender to this person who gave him a car when he was running for that position? I think we should reflect more on the impact of this to the democratic processes we have in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Move that microphone to the NRM representative. I think wants to make a submission to the discussion. Okay, all right.
Thank you so much, moderator. I was actually wondering whether political parties would be given a separate chance to respond. But as it looks now, the design seems to be that we also respond among others. And this is a little unfair, especially for a ruling political party, because ideally we appear to be on the defense side. So you can't respond to an issue raised over 3 hours when even the moderator is warning you to keep it brief. So that would be really, really unfair. But all said, I could say that I've taken notes and we have listened, if that was a design for listening. But if the design was for input, the time is not enough. But let me also
make your input, sir.
Let me thank the keynote address with a very good CV. My understanding is that the CV of Ugandans are not CV for the sake, but their experiences, when they come back home, they are plowed into the national resources and the basket of wisdom. And I see already is plowing it back. Thank you so much. My name is Major, retired Awich. I could also have my long CV, but I will not say it here. But I'm a director for external affairs in NRM party, and I'm representing the Secretary General. I'm also a lawyer from Makerere University and a bar qualified from LDC as well. I've also been a judge at the UN Human Rights in Geneva for 8 years after being elected by the 193 ambassadors in New York. In other words, I've been elected by the world for 2 Kisanja, and I've served in Geneva. I've served in Geneva for 2 terms, overseeing the 193 states in the compliance of those conventions you are talking about. So those compliance are not signed for the sake, they are signed so that state comply. For the state to comply, there's an elected body who sit and oversee states. They receive reports from states. So I've been in that body for 8 years. As I said, I'm a retired soldier. I'm also one of the NRA Kadogos. Those babies you knew in NRA, of course, we're now old people and we are grown up. Now, about election financing, particularly private sector, I would think that in NRM views, a private sector do financing in good faith to give a sense of independence for Uganda, especially when it is local or private funding. You give a sense of independence for the country. It should also not promote corrupt tendencies, and it should be for the sake of peace and stability, not for the sake of Mfuna Kochi, what do I get from it? So this is our broad outline as a party, and whoever gets into contact with us, that is our broad principle. And if anybody thinks he would get it for a gain, then I think he does that behind our back. I also want to mention now, bullet by bullet, that political parties in Uganda are also given money. As a political party, we get money by government because, I mean, there's money given to Election Commission and it is shared in a representative ratio, the number of MPs you send. So I think it is worth noting that. NRM doesn't have membership fees, as we said. The spirit behind us not having membership fees is that historically we're a mass party, we're a revolutionary party. So if we thought that if we subject our members into membership fees, it would not be fair. It would be contrary to the spirit of a mass party. We have very many members who have been arguing, please let our membership fees, let our membership fee. But in all organs, the Central Executive Committee and the National Conference, it has been ruled out, it has been debated and argued. So we don't have membership fees and we are okay with it. We have not addressed the issue raised by Professor Luingu about the percentage and the effect as a party, because many pertinent issues we discuss it, because after all, we are the ones who take it, give our executive. I hope you are aware that the ruling party is the party in power, because we are the one with the contract with the people, the so-called social contract between the party and us. It is only the party that forms a government. So a government is simply our agent. So we have the principal agency relationship. So if we get a matter like what Professor Muingu raises, we'd later, of course, address it. Incidentally, Professor Muingu, old as he is my old boy of the Great Intare School. He was ahead of Museveni in Intare School, but I also went through the great school. So it's my hobby. And I know him personally. I'll personally discuss with him, but I will also raise it up at a party level.
A member of Werantare is here.
Oh, good. That is so interesting. In our school speak, we have a belief in Intare School, which is a boys' school in Umbara, and Gwaranyenyi is in Bushenyi. But culturally, we believe that every beautiful lady like her comes from Gwaranyenyi. Yes, so you can see she's there. So she's my OG. How we can make good comment of the protocol? The principle is that once a state party signs a protocol, it's bound by it. And I would think that in many conventions and protocols, it urges state parties to legislate in their domestic law. For example, you have a protocol on the prevention of children and armed conflict, which is a protocol, additional protocol to UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is expected, therefore, that when a state ratifies it, introduce the crime of recruitment. In other words, if a brigadier in Gulu recruits a child, under which law will you charge him? Because the protocol cannot operate as it is. So I think it is all of us to see that once Uganda is committed to this, the domestication, especially the criminal aspects that gives prohibition, must be there. Then we shall watch from there why the law is not working. So the conventions, as long as we have signed as a country, we have to do that. Issa Kisito says the president made this pronouncement. I really need to look at that he made a pronouncement because of your being a political. I didn't get the statement, and maybe we need to get the context. But I do not, I am sure there are many other organizations in the country which say they are political, including religious organizations. And I do not see how one would be penalized for that, directly or indirectly, but we need to check the context of that statement. I also like to comment that our friendship is being over-exaggerated or misinterpreted. Like friendship with friends like Kwagalana, the group of the rich, and many others, they're free to be our friends, and they're free to be with friends to any other person. But I see like, of course, as friends, they're free to choose what they want, whether they want to raise money for cancer, whether they want to raise money for schools. It is there. But for us, we think that if they come to us as friends, then we deal with them. And I must say here that for us as NRM, we actually have a lot of volunteer friends who come. Not anywhere do we have a desk which particularly follows up or harasses people or even demands for contribution. But I also like to say that beware of blackmail. There are some people who may be our cadres, but they can take it upon themselves to actually pass underground and say they are sent by the parties. If you approach, do due diligence. And such persons, such purported cadres, when they come in their best interest, they'll blackmail you and they'll want to extort something. So do due diligence and see really if the party has done the sending of that person. And then the issue of tax exemption, you mention it so blatantly that somebody gets a letter and says you are exempted. I wish you had that examples, because I've had issues with our political commentators. For example, you have a person right in front of the TV and he says, NRM is castrating men. Then he said, has he castrated Okello? Has he castrated Mr. Tom or Peter? So it is better that we talk some of these things with clear, critical examples. I know under the law as a lawyer that tax exemption, especially for investors, are very clear these days, so that you just check on the checklist of the exemptions and you benefit. For example, the case of the Italian lady, there was a general fear, the Italian lady of the proposed hospital. There was a tendency that she exceptionally benefited from the tax exemption. We had to tell the Attorney General to explain, and the provision in the law was there. And this is not only applicable to the Italian lady, but to everybody. So if indeed there's URA here, if indeed there's somebody who simply gets a letter, waves it around and gets exemption, that's unfortunate. And it is really working behind the party policy. As I said, we are party in power and we are the one, government is our agent. So we expect them to work within the spirit of the party. Finally, many things that are talked about, like the monopoly system, arbitrary monopoly, and also tax exemption, some of these things border violations of rights, and others even border criminality. So I would urge that whoever feels such an issue touches him or her, try also legal remedy. If it is a violation of a discrimination of some sort, try legal remedy and let courts pronounce itself. And we see, definitely we don't condone such a thing. So, Mr. Moderator, as I said, the time is little. We are on the defense side, or so to say, but I agree with what the keynote address presenter presented. It is healthy, it is good for the country, and that's, as I said, it's good to have such wisdom back in the country. For us as NRM, we wish well for the country, we wish well for Uganda, and we wish well for everybody. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Major Awish, for that contribution. Thank you so much. Time check is past the hour, so and I can only take one burning contribution from the audience. One, if it is there. If there is also one burning contribution from the online audience. But if I'm going to give every panelist, I'll start with the keynote address speaker. 1 minute to wrap it up. These are parting shots, and then we get out of here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Henry and the team, for giving me an opportunity to share my views on this very important topic of political financing, which is not being given the highlight, the audience that it requires. I am very thankful for the organization that you've begun this conversation, this uncomfortable conversation. And I hope that the activities will continue as we continue to highlight the challenges that it can create for us as a society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the parting shots. Honorable, your parting shots.
Thank you very much. I want to thank those who have been listening to us. I want to thank also ACFIM for giving us the opportunity to discuss this topic, and to thank Daniel for the keynote address and bringing out all those issues. I'm sure no one is in question as to whether regulating campaign financing is necessary. We know that it is necessary, and we know that it is important that we talk about it so that people are aware. But again, I will say that yes, indeed, it is necessary to put the laws in place, but it is very important to make sure that the laws are implemented, I will say, to the letter, and also in a free and fair manner, that they are not implemented selectively. Otherwise, we end up putting laws in place that will disadvantage so many when they were originally intended to benefit them. So thank you so much. I hope that we will find a way of holding government accountable. Someone asked me, who is government? I know we are all government, but when we cast our votes, we do give some people responsibility in government. So I hope that those who have the responsibility, we will be able to hold them accountable to ensure that these laws, once they are put in place, that they are implemented in a free and fair manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Jova Kamateka. Yes.
Only one. For the 20 years I've been Speaker for Kasita, I have not come out to say sorry for a word said, because I don't say fallacies. For being on record for this particular one, the representative from the NRM needs to go and look at the business of Tiger Head batteries. For fear of legal challenges and prosecution, let him find out who are dealing in Tiger Head batteries and on what basis. A business that used to be enjoyed by over 45 major importers is now for 2, and each one has a letter. That said, these are things that we learn, especially in Africa. I would urge the politicians, if you don't feel you are comfortable in running the proper way, be a coward like myself. Don't stand. Because when you offer yourself to stand, we are going to demand you for services. How are you going to serve us when you gave us money to vote for you, or when we silently gave you money to compromise you? It all leads to one thing: implementation and the regulation of political financing, so that whoever is gotten to have breached the guidelines is held responsible and chased away from politics. The way Africa is, it's very difficult to become rich and successful if you completely don't do some politics. And why would this be? The president said while we were in Tungamo recently, Kasita, you will only be helped if you leave the soul and become a Paul. I end with that.
You must convert. The message was clear, you must convert. Okay, let's cross over to, we are closing, Honorable. Okay, but we are closing.
Thank you. Yes, we may blame the politicians, but now if I don't give money now currently in Uganda, I do not go through. So I think the onus is on the public, members of the public, for them not to demand money for politicians, and they should actually refuse it. That way we'll create a system that is fair to everyone, so that we elect leaders on the basis of ideas, and when they go, they serve us. Thank you.
Okay, the public has heard. They will not demand money from politicians. Let's cross over to our colleagues who are on call for the parting shots. Kuala, are you on call? I hope you're still there. Probably they dropped off. Okay, Kuala, are you on call? Okay, it's only John on call. I'm not seeing others. John, we are having our parting shots. You can make your parting shots. I lost you at some point. I had a question for you, but this is where you give your final remarks.
Thank you. Sorry, you're breaking, but I just want to thank ASFIM for organizing this dialogue. I think the important thing is regulation, because businesses will always have an interest in influencing politicians, and they'll do whatever is necessary. But how do we regulate it to ensure that there's a certain level of fair play? Because if certain individuals influence policies and find it easier to tilt policies in their favor, then it disadvantages the many. So I think the important thing is to ensure that you have a certain level of regulation and transparency, and also to name and shame, because once you have that, then it's easier to address issues around corruption, state capture, extortion, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much, and as I found the dialogue very very informative.
Federation for Small Medium Enterprises. And this brings us to a close. The conversation is still ongoing online. Hashtag Money Politics in Africa, and we can still continue to carry forward these thoughts. It's been a very great and interesting last 2.5 hours or so. And now it's a 1:15. We should be breaking off for lunch. I want to thank our online audience for being part of this conversation, for being part of the 5th annual symposium on private sector and political financing in Africa. Thank you so much. We also extend our sincere gratitude to the online audience for being part of this conversation. And most importantly, I want to thank the panelists that have graced today's conversation and today's theme, the keynote speaker, Dr. Thank you so much for laying the case. Thank you so much. We appreciate Honorable. Thank you so much, Kasita, for being part of this conversation. Thank you so much. Until next year, around the same time, we will be able to follow through some of these conversations coming through. And I wish you all the best. God bless. Bye-bye for now. Yeah, for God and my country.
Amen.
Politics and the private sector have a symbiotic relationship. On one hand, the private sector needs politicians for business protection and creating the enabling environment needed for business to thrive, while on the other hand, politicians need private business as a source of political campaign finance donations. Thus, business companies and corporations, local and international, target the politicians who work in government as a strategy to win big ticket deals, such as infrastructure construction and supply of military hardware or equipment. The fact that governments often spend over 60% of their total national budgets on public procurements attracts the interest of private business. Thus, businesses take keen interest in who gets to occupy political office. The practice is that when businessmen make political finance contributions, they expect contracts and other benefits in return. Sometimes criminals hide under the umbrella of private sector and make political contributions with the intention that if they are seen to have friends in high elective office, the police will be tempted to avoid investigating their activities too thoroughly. It's against this backdrop the RACFIM intends to organize the 5th Symposium interrogating private sector and political finance in Africa.